good number of years of where I have to navigate those contradictions. Um, I was able, however, to carry on my job, my responsibility, in spite of those limitations. A good project that I remember that we developed was it was a crisis in a high school, boundary between the Mexican and the African American community called Farragut, where we were pulled to basically take over the school, which we did. Were able to bring people from the outside. We neutralized the council, which was appointed and elected by the people, because we were given that power by the city. So, you know, we were still in position of doing work. It's just that that history, which was at another level. It was a policy, power to negotiate with the mayor, with the mayor and support with the mayor, carry on policies. That was eliminated. But this part I was allowed to do that. And so we developed what we call the Lawndale Coalition, because it was Little Village, a community in the city of Chicago, a Mexican primarily, and Lawndale, which was African American. It was born out of our intervention at Farragut, where we actually developed all kinds of youth programs along the line of human relation as a basis, as the as the mission, you know, it was great. It was we are actually the group which was representative of both communities, including the political leaders. At that point, it was Chuy, Jesus Garcia, who was still an alderman, and then many religious and civic leaders from the area. Concluded that there was a need to develop sort of a commission on human relations, but rooted in the hood, in the neighborhood. And so we started negotiating with the city. We were able to develop what we call the Youth for Unity project, which was a group of youth being placed along the line where there were racial conflict, and then with the schools being able to develop human relation project within those schools. It was a very, very beautiful, very effective, much necessary initiative. But then we have the issue of the economy, and the Republican political and economic shift affected our possibility to develop the project. And actually everything is in my dissertation. My master's dissertation was on that project. And I guess it's part of my file, so whoever want to go and research it would have an idea of all the work that was done in that part of the city. Then there was a crisis in Bridgeport, which was at that point the last bastion of racism in the city. I was sent, Mayor Daley says that his response to the crisis, because there was a youth that was almost killed by an Italian gang in the middle of this community. Actually, the incident did not happen in Bridgeport, but the media loved to portray Bridgeport because the Daley family came from Bridgeport. But actually, the incident happened in Armour Square, another neighborhood, which boundary with Bridgeport and Chinatown. And so I was, you know, the mayor said, well, I'm going to develop a task force to go and investigate and research and come up with remedies to address blah, blah, blah. And so I was sent to develop this task force to this no human land, because actually at that point it was very racist still. Through difficulties and the support of the clergy actually, and some of the, you know, people like us have a tendency to, because of our own experience, to look at where are the activists, right? Who actually, and I didn't have that much problem, believe it or not, in Bridgeport to be able to find activism within the church. The church activists were the one that understood, but also there was a political liability to the mayor, because Bridgeport was portrayed as the place. And so his alderman, which was actually his first hand, Alderman Hughes, had a stake. It was within his interest to see some resolution to this crisis. It was a civil war because the African American community was from the project across the expressway. And so I was able to get him, and I didn't have to work that hard, to send his chief of staff to be part of this task force, which was finally developed. And with that task force, we developed a huge program where we involved all the schools and the parks, actually using experience from the London experience, getting the church and getting the schools and getting the parks, everything that served the youth, and getting them into this huge task force, which we call the ABC, for Armour Square, Chinatown, and Bridgeport, Human Relations Task Force. And then we developed, all these people became part of the retreat. We developed an action plan inclusive of all the parks have to come up with specific programs on human relations, and so the school similar to Lawndale. And then at the same time we were dealing with the case, the legal implication of the case could have also had repercussion on the city. So the mayor needed to have his best people involved. On the defense side, no, not on the on the victim side, and I have to say that they came up with the best George Betts lawyers that, and this is public money, you know, because the Caruso family, who were the people who were involved with the mafia and everything else, had the money to be able to hire the best lawyers, and they did. That perhaps the state can afford, and but the mayor were able to do their homework because of the seriousness of the case. It became international news, man, I was very proud of the team that came on our side, and we finally won that particular case. The task force continued to operate way after the case was resolved. The guy, the court were not able, because it was a history of mishap. In many cases, work done by the Caruso family, as one of the eyewitnesses disappeared. The other one was killed. I mean, it was a very violent process. The state have to hide our eyewitness because they were threatened, and they actually were concerned about their own safety. Anyway, we were not able to find premeditated, you know, which was what the city was searching for. That it was a premeditated crime, that the Caruso knew what they were doing, that it was planned beforehand. And that was not being, we were not able to, with our guys, because of the lack of eyewitness. And the ones that we have were not able the information was not there to prove premeditation. The only one that actually was going to be key was the one that disappeared and the one that was killed. And so in the absence of that, Caruso they got, I believe it was 12 to 14 years. Was a youth, actually. But it was a case, given the seriousness of the case, of 30, 35, 40 years. So they came out in a way, you know, winning, although we also got a piece of the whole process and saw some resolution at the end of the rainbow. So the Lawndale Coalition stood there for almost 10 years, addressing human relation issues in all three communities. By the same token, then, you know, I got involved in developing all kinds of projects in some other parts of my community. One very key that I was also pulled after the mayor made a commitment to a task force was in Humboldt Park. In Humboldt Park, we have, the parks did not have the capacity to address, you know, intergroup conflicts. And so there were conflicts that started to develop as the Mexican community moved north into the Humboldt Park area, into the Puerto Rican community. There is a tendency, and it's urban, and I don't think it's unique to the city of Chicago, where people claim territories. If you have spent 20, 30 years and you have built those neighborhoods, resisting, in the case of the Puerto Rican, police brutality, neglect by the political leadership, all kinds of stuff. And we took it from zero to elect our own leaders, to elect our own police superintendent. I mean, after histories of difficulties, it is expected that we claim that neighborhood as our neighborhood. And somehow the city began to see and accept our own decision, which is no written law, it's just happened, and begin to look at in this case, Humboldt Park, as the Puerto Rican community neighborhood. So when the Mexicans started moving north and started to take places of the park to play soccer, that used to be areas of recreation of the Puerto Rican community for picnic and so on and so forth, and the Mexican community, the Latin American in general, soccer is a very serious sport. They bring the whole family. I mean, they start kicking the ball before you know they have tournaments. And a little piece of land become, they need a lot of space to do that. And so the tensions between the Puerto Ricans who were using for picnics and or baseball begin to build up, and the park never was able to address those moments of difficulties until in the midst of the Puerto Ricans' week celebration, a Mexican shot a Puerto Rican. It was a civil war. And of course, it became, I think that one became national news because of the implication of it. Definitely, the whole city knew about the whole incident. And the mayor offered to develop a task force. And who was sent to develop the task force? Well, at the Servidor. Humboldt Park was easier than Bridgeport and Lawndale because that was my neighborhood. And so Miguel and Chuy was a very respected leader in the Mexican community, Miguel in the Puerto Rican. And so was a lot of the civic Puerto Rican leaders who I knew because of my activism in Humboldt Park. So what I did is that I got into the Park Council, and through the Park Council began to address the issue. Was able to work with the members of the council who understood the seriousness of the case and were very concerned and were looking for assistance, to then accept my proposal of developing a task force within the council to address only the transition of this crisis. Something unique that happened right away was that the Puerto Rican leadership, civic and political, came together with the Mexican and used the media to then call for peace, basically, a moment of peace and somehow, something that was, it was burning because people were moving to start, this war. That particular press conference was able to put a hold into it because you have all kinds of leaders in that conference. Would make it easier for me then to do my work within the council. And the first thing that we did was call for a mass meeting to discuss the incident, including the participation of the Mexicans who were in charge of the soccer leagues. And out of that, it was beautiful. Out of that meeting, our people, if anything, we have to, those of us that went through that experience, have to be proud of how our people were able to talk about the whole issue of unity, not revenge, but the issue of rights and concern. And it was easy for them to understand the neglect of the park, in particular that tension. And many of them saw it coming. They just did not have the capacity to intervene. And that was the moment then to come up with a resolution, which we did, which was included a research of the park. And we thought that the Mexican community couldn't be blamed, that they were victims like we were, and that we needed then to bring them into the council, which we did. And then one of the items that were added to the general agenda of the council was the development of a soccer field in Humboldt Park. And anybody that visits Humboldt Park will see a beautiful soccer field south of our beautiful Puerto Rican Museum of Art and Culture. Well, that was the outcome of that initiative. And of course, I'm summarizing a lot of work, but the Mexican community also joined us in addressing all kinds of negligence of the city park system of Humboldt Park. And so I spent 10 years in that council, something that it was not planned. But it was because after the whole human relation issues was resolved, there was serious issues pertaining to the infrastructure of the park. The park is beautiful these days. It started at that point where we made almost a staff of Humboldt Park the superintendent of the park system of the city. And then I was appointed, of course there was a lot of other stuff that happened, but then I was appointed as director of the intergroup relation, education and outreach for the Commission on Human Relations. And something that came out from the time where I was in charge of a chunk of the city, a third of the city actually, was that the rationale behind making or accepting or helping develop policies within the Commission, that every hate crime incident that was not ordinary, meaning that it was not one-to-one, that needed a mass intervention, then we needed to develop a task force. And we developed